It's a really strange situation when we are seeing that one of the side effects of identity politics, as I see it, is that there is an absolutely purist narrative. You see this with, for example, so called cultural appropriation. Now, what I mean by purist narrative is that certain people, unless things conform exactly to their way of thinking, then what isn't their way of thinking must be racist, must be sexist, must be homophobic, etc. And it's a really shackling way of silencing discussion, intellectual debate. Um, so let me give a few examples of this. Let's say a white director, a white film director, or documentarian for that matter, wants to make a film about, say, the Jim Crow era of the United States. Now, they obviously will want to make the film realistic. And so part of that would have to include depictions of anti black racism in this context. And to do that, they'd have to use, for example, the M word. Now, there have been a number of films directed by white directors that have been quite liberal in that usage. But we're now seeing a situation where, for example, if a white writer mentions racism, if they mention the M word, then there's a perception that they are being racist. To me, it's a case of don't shoot the messenger. They are simply talking about the ugly mentality that racists had. So, how can you address a prejudice if you can't even talk about it openly and candidly? I understand people being sensitive to certain words. Certainly, I can understand black people not wanting to hear that word, but it is a realistic portrayal. This is racism. This is what it was. Another example, I've just been watching an art documentary. It's a few years old. BBC documentary, actually. It's a very good series if you get a chance to see it. And it's by a Dr. Fox. I forget the guy's first name. But he's an art historian and he looks at three colors: gold, blue, and white. Now, I'm watching the white series, the white episode now. It's about the history of white as it was used in the Elgin marbles and a range of other things. Anyway, check out the series. It's a good series, well worth watching. But there's this one point where he mentions a well-known art historian by the name of J.J. Winkelmann, who's a German intellectual in the 18th century. Now, Winkelmann happened to be homosexual, and he came from a cobbler's background, but he had much loftier ambitions. So anyway, Dr. Fox mentioned this. He said he was also gay. So it's just a statement of fact. And I was looking at some of the comments, and it's like, why mention he was gay? Why? I didn't expect this sort of prejudice from the BBC. What prejudice? Simply mentioning the fact. And I think actually what Dr. Fox was driving at was that in the time and context, that was unusual. I.e., presumably a cobbler would have been, whilst a skilled profession, more, particularly in Germany at that time, I would imagine, more of a run of the mill profession rather than something that would be, I don't know, considered establishment. But that's the impression I got anyway. That he was saying that in the time and context it was unusual. He wasn't saying there's something wrong with being gay. And this is an example. Okay, I know that's a very panicky thing I'm looking at, but if you look at the episode, you'll see what I mean. And I did leave a few comments there because it irked me off how people were reading into that. Oh, the BBC's being homophobic. The BBC is about the last likely institution to be homophobic. But anyway, um, we're now getting to a point of shooting the messenger. If a straight person talks about homophobia, if a white person talks about anti-black or anti-Asian racism, or for that matter, if a black or Asian person talks about anti-white racism, which isn't as common, but you know, are we now saying that talking about prejudice, writing about prejudice, that dramatizing prejudice is prejudice in itself? That's crazy. And it's a very idiotic way of looking at it, in my opinion. I don't care if I insult anyone by saying idiotic, because it's these stupid people that are shackling freedom of conscience and creativity. It's these politically correct fools that are, they won't try and understand the context. It's not, if you're making a film about racism, you're not being racist, you're making a film about racism. And I think we're seeing this trend towards, I write short stories. Whether I get them published or not, I don't know. I intend to set one of them around the civil rights movement. Now, I don't want to sanitize it and say, "Oh, you black fellow, I'm going to lynch you." No, it wasn't like that. It was far more brutal, far more raw, and I want it to be as realistic as possible. That may mean I'll have to use the M word. Now, as a white writer, will I get slack for doing that, even though I'm attacking the racism? These are serious questions because I think there is a lot going on right now. We need to be very, very wary of how identity politics combined with shackling political correctness is destroying freedom of conscience and creativity. I think there needs to be a serious talk around that. Um, and these identitarians who say that, I disagree with the logic that only black people can talk about anti-black racism, or only gay people can talk about homophobia, or only soldiers for that matter can talk about war. You may not have personally experienced something, but that doesn't mean you can't have empathy. Doesn't mean you can't have human sympathy. So if your logic is only this demographic can talk about a thing, that's absurd. That is utterly absurd. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Hopefully, I've left people some things to think about. Don't shoot the messenger.